There are people you stop seeing long before they disappear, not because they become invisible, but because your eyes grow used to walking past them. Every city has someone like that. The old man sitting on the same bench, the woman selling flowers on the same corner, the veteran holding a cardboard sign no one bothers to read. You pass them, you glance for a second, then you continue with your day, never wondering who they were. Before life became this, until one ordinary morning, something happens that forces everyone to look again. And by then, it's often too late. Every weekday, at exactly 7:45 a.m., the streets of Ashford came alive. Businessmen hurried toward glass office towers. Women balanced coffee cups while answering phone calls. Delivery trucks crowded the intersections. The city moved with purpose. Everyone had somewhere to be. Except one man. He always arrived first, long before the first employee unlocked the front doors of First National Bank. He wore the same faded brown coat every day. Its sleeves were torn. Its buttons no longer matched. His gray beard had grown uneven over the years. His worn leather boots had seen better decades. He carried everything he owned inside an old canvas backpack. Without saying a word, he would quietly sit on the stone bench across from the bank's entrance, not asking for money, not holding a cardboard sign, not speaking to strangers. He simply sat there, watching, waiting, as though he were expecting someone. No one knew his name. To the bank employees, he was simply the homeless man outside. Some avoided looking at him. Others nodded politely before hurrying inside. Security guards occasionally asked if he needed assistance. His answer never changed. No, thank you. Then he smiled. A calm, almost peaceful smile. The kind that didn't seem to belong on someone who had lost everything. For nearly 15 years, his routine never changed. Monday through Friday. Rain, snow, scorching summer heat. He arrived before everyone else. And he left precisely at 5 p.m., the exact moment the bank closed. People joked about it. Some thought he was mentally ill. Others assumed he was waiting for someone who had long forgotten him. The truth was something no one could have imagined. Across the street, a small coffee shop opened every morning at 7. Its owner, Maria Alvarez, had watched the old man for years. Unlike everyone else, she noticed the little things. He never begged, never shouted, never caused trouble. Every afternoon, he carefully picked up litter left by strangers. If someone dropped a wallet, he returned it. If an elderly person struggled with groceries, he quietly carried the bags without asking for anything in return. Then he'd return to his bench, as if none of it mattered. Maria often wondered how someone with so little could give so much. One cold December morning, she carried a hot cup of coffee across the street. "You don't have to pay," she said gently. The old man smiled. "I know. Then why do you always leave $1 on my counter?" Maria asked. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a single worn dollar bill, and placed it in her hand. Because kindness should never feel like charity. Maria looked at him in silence. There was something unusual about the way he spoke. Educated, thoughtful, measured. Not the words people expected from a man living on the streets. She couldn't help asking, "What did you do before?" She hesitated. "Before all this?" The old man looked toward the bank. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he smiled sadly. "I used to work there." Maria turned toward the towering glass building. "You were a janitor?" He chuckled softly. "No." "Then what were you?" The old man looked away. That was a very long time ago. Before Maria could ask another question, a black luxury sedan slowly pulled up to the front entrance of the bank. Employees immediately stood straighter. Security guards adjusted their uniforms. The revolving doors opened. Everyone knew exactly who had arrived. The new CEO, a man whose reputation stretched far beyond the city. Respected, powerful, brilliant. It was his first official day leading the bank. No one noticed. The homeless man quietly stood from his bench, his eyes fixed on the man stepping out of the car. For the first time in 15 years, his peaceful smile disappeared. His hands began to tremble, and under his breath, he whispered 4 words. "I knew you'd return. Some faces stay with you forever, not because you see them every day, but because they changed your life. Sometimes, you don't even realize it until decades later." The new CEO had no idea that the man sitting outside his bank had once shaped the course of his entire future. The black sedan came to a smooth stop. The driver stepped out first. He quickly opened the rear door. A tall man in his early 50s adjusted his navy suit before stepping onto the sidewalk. His name was Daniel Whitmore. For years, financial magazines had called him one of the brightest minds in American banking. He had rescued struggling companies, turned failing institutions into billion-dollar success stories. And now, he had been chosen to lead First National Bank. Employees lined the entrance. Some applauded politely. Others nervously introduced themselves. Daniel smiled, shook hands, thanked everyone. Yet, something felt strangely familiar. He couldn't explain it. It wasn't the building. It wasn't the city. It was a feeling, as though he'd been there before. Long ago, across the street, the old homeless man watched quietly. His hands trembled, not with fear, with recognition. For 15 years, he had waited. Every morning, every season, believing this day would eventually come. Most people thought he was waiting for money, or for family. The truth was far more extraordinary. He had been waiting. For Daniel, Maria noticed something unusual. The old man had never stood while watching the bank before. Never. Yet today, he remained standing. His eyes never left the new CEO. "Do you know him?" she asked softly. The old man smiled. "I knew him. Before the world did." Maria frowned. "What does that mean?" He looked toward the sky. "It means dreams sometimes keep their promises." Before she could ask another question, the old man quietly sat back down, as though nothing had happened. Inside the bank, Daniel's first day moved quickly. Meetings, interviews, department tours, financial reports. Everything looked impressive, but every time he glanced out the large windows of the executive office, his eyes drifted toward the stone bench, toward the old man. There was something about him, something impossible to explain. His face felt familiar, painfully familiar. Late that afternoon, Daniel called his executive assistant. "The gentleman sitting outside." The assistant looked confused. "The homeless man?" Daniel nodded. "How long has he been there?" She shrugged. "Longer than I've worked here. 5 years." She laughed softly. "More like 15. Daniel looked back out the window. "Does anyone know who he is?" "Not really. Security says he's harmless. He never asks anyone for anything. He simply comes every morning and leaves when the bank closes." Daniel stared silently through the glass. Something inside him tightened. He had seen that routine before. Somewhere. Somehow. He just couldn't remember where. As evening approached, the employees began leaving. One by one, the lobby slowly emptied. At exactly 5 o'clock, the old man stood, placed his worn backpack over one shoulder, and began walking away. Daniel happened to look out the window at that exact moment. For the first time, their eyes met. The old man smiled. A warm, gentle, almost fatherly smile. Then he tipped his old cap and disappeared into the evening crowd. Daniel stood frozen. His heart suddenly raced, because without warning, a memory flashed across his mind. A rainy afternoon, a frightened little boy, a strong hand reaching down, and a voice saying, "Never let one bad day decide the rest of your life." Daniel grabbed the edge of his desk. His breathing became uneven. Where had he heard those words before? That night, the memory refused to leave him. He searched through old family photographs, school yearbooks, boxes that hadn't been opened in years. Nothing. No answers. Only one growing certainty. He had met that man before, and somehow, that meeting had changed his life. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the bank earlier than usual. 7:15. The bench was empty. He waited. 7:30. Still empty. Then, at exactly 7:45, the old man appeared at the end of the street, walking slowly, carrying the same worn backpack, as though he had nowhere else to be. Daniel took one step toward him, then another. Neither man spoke. Not yet. But both knew. The moment they had unknowingly waited years for had finally arrived. Some memories don't disappear. They simply wait, hidden beneath years of success, beneath promotions, beneath expensive suits, until one familiar face unlocks everything. Daniel Whitmore stood outside First National Bank, watching the old man slowly cross the street. The city bustled around them. Car horns echoed through downtown. People hurried past without slowing down. No one noticed that two lives were about to collide again. The old man stopped a few feet away. He smiled politely. "Good morning." Daniel stared at him. His voice was barely a whisper. "Do I know you?" The old man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked up at the towering bank, then back at Daniel. "You used to." Daniel frowned. "I'm sorry, I can't remember." The old man smiled gently. "That's all right. You were only 10 years old. Daniel's heart skipped. 10. Why did that number feel so familiar? A flash of lightning crossed his memory. A storm. Heavy rain. A frightened little boy. A broken bicycle lying in the middle of the road. But the image vanished as quickly as it appeared. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I know your face. I just don't know why. The old man nodded. Memory can be kind. And sometimes, it can be cruel. Maria watched quietly from her coffee shop. She had never seen the old man speak to anyone for more than a few seconds. Yet today, the conversation continued. Neither man seemed eager to leave. Daniel took a cautious step closer. Can you tell me your name? The old man smiled. My name is Samuel. It was the first time anyone in the neighborhood had heard it. For 15 years, he had simply been the homeless man outside the bank. Now, he had a name. Samuel. Daniel repeated it quietly. Samuel. The name stirred something deep inside him. Then, another memory surfaced. Not complete, just a single moment. A warm hand resting on his shoulder. A voice saying, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to keep walking anyway. Daniel suddenly looked up. You said that. Samuel smiled. I did. When? Daniel asked. Samuel looked toward the gray clouds gathering above the city. On the worst day of your childhood. The world around Daniel seemed to disappear. He searched desperately through memories that refused to come together. What happened? Samuel's eyes softened. You got lost. Daniel blinked. No. My parents always said they found me. Samuel nodded slowly. They did. But not before someone else found you first. Without another word, Samuel reached into his worn backpack. Carefully, he removed an old blue umbrella. Its fabric was faded. One spoke was slightly bent. Daniel stared at it. His breathing became uneven. The umbrella. He knew it. He had seen it before. Somewhere. Long ago. Samuel opened it gently. Rain began falling almost at that exact moment. Soft. Steady. Just like years before. Then Samuel quietly asked, do you remember the rain now? Daniel looked at the umbrella. The sound of raindrops striking the fabric echoed through his mind. Suddenly, the memories rushed back. 32 years earlier, a violent thunderstorm had swept through Ashford. 10-year-old Daniel had become separated from his parents after leaving school. Terrified, he wandered through unfamiliar streets, crying, cold, certain no one would find him, until a stranger carrying a blue umbrella knelt beside him. The stranger smiled warmly. It's okay. We'll find your family. He bought Daniel hot chocolate, wrapped his own coat around the shivering boy, stayed beside him for nearly 2 hours, and refused to leave, until Daniel's parents arrived safely. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. It was you. Samuel nodded. It was. Daniel took another step forward. His voice trembled. My parents searched for you. They wanted to thank you. Samuel smiled. I know, but I was already gone. Daniel looked at him in disbelief. You disappeared. Samuel nodded. I had somewhere else I needed to be. Daniel shook his head. No, there has to be more. Samuel looked toward the bank once again. There is. So much more. He slowly reached into his backpack again. This time, he removed a faded newspaper clipping, folded carefully, protected inside a clear plastic sleeve. He handed it to Daniel. Daniel unfolded it. His face instantly lost all color. The headline read, Local bank hero saves millions during historic financial crisis. Beneath the headline was Daniel's photograph, but someone had circled one sentence in red ink. His leadership saved First National Bank from collapse. Across the bottom, written in Samuel's familiar handwriting, were 8 unforgettable words. I always knew you would change lives. Daniel looked up, his eyes filled with tears. But before he could ask another question, a black SUV suddenly pulled to the curb. 2 strangers stepped out, both wearing expensive suits, both staring directly at Samuel. One of them quietly whispered, There he is. Samuel's smile disappeared. For the first time, he looked afraid. The past has a strange way of finding us. Sometimes, it arrives quietly. Other times, it steps out of a black SUV. Samuel's smile disappeared. His shoulders stiffened. For the first time since Daniel had met him, the peaceful man who had spent 15 years sitting quietly outside the bank looked afraid, not frightened for himself, but for someone else. The 2 men walked toward them. Expensive tailored suits, polished shoes, dark sunglasses. They looked more like corporate executives than ordinary visitors. The older of the 2 smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. There you are, Samuel. Samuel didn't answer. Daniel stepped forward instinctively. Do you know these men? Samuel sighed quietly. I was hoping they'd never find me. The younger man laughed softly. You've been hiding in plain sight all these years. Daniel looked from one face to the other. Who are you? The older man extended a hand. Richard Holloway, chairman of the Holloway Financial Group. Daniel recognized the name immediately. One of the country's largest investment firms. Powerful, influential, feared by competitors. What do you want with Samuel? Richard's smile faded. We're here to finish something that began 30 years ago. Daniel felt the tension rising. Samuel quietly placed a hand on his shoulder. It's all right. No, Daniel replied firmly. It isn't. For the first time, Samuel saw the little boy from the storm. Only now, he wasn't frightened anymore. He was standing up for someone else. Richard reached into a leather briefcase. He removed a thick folder. Yellow documents spilled across the top. Property records, court filings, bank statements. One document caught Daniel's attention. Across the top, in bold letters, Samuel Carter. Daniel looked at Samuel. Carter. Samuel nodded. My full name is Samuel Carter. Daniel frowned. Why would a financial company have your records? Richard answered before Samuel could. Because 30 years ago, Mr. Carter owned this bank. Silence. The entire street seemed to stop. Maria stepped out of her coffee shop. Several employees gathered near the entrance. No one could believe what they had just heard. The homeless man owned the bank. Daniel laughed nervously. That's impossible. Richard calmly handed him an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, Youngest bank founder in state history. The photograph beneath it showed a smiling man in his 40s. Clean-shaven, confident, standing proudly in front of First National Bank. It was Samuel, 35 years younger. Daniel stared in disbelief. You built this bank. Samuel smiled sadly. Brick by brick. Daniel looked back at the towering glass building. Every award displayed inside. Every employee. Every customer. Everything had begun with the quiet man everyone ignored. So what happened? Samuel looked away. I lost it. Richard corrected him immediately. No, you gave it away. Samuel closed his eyes. That's one way of saying it. Richard shook his head. No, you sacrificed everything. Daniel's heart pounded. What are you talking about? Richard slowly opened another document. This bank nearly collapsed during the recession 30 years ago. Thousands of families would have lost their savings. Hundreds of employees would have lost their jobs. Daniel listened in stunned silence. Richard continued. There was only one way to save everyone. Samuel quietly lowered his head. He signed everything over. Daniel looked at Samuel. You gave away the bank. Samuel nodded. I couldn't let innocent families lose everything. But the agreement. Richard paused. Was never supposed to leave him with nothing. Maria stepped closer. What do you mean? Richard looked at Samuel. Then quietly answered. He was betrayed. The word hung in the air. Betrayed. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. Samuel had never lost the bank because of bad business. He hadn't failed. Someone had taken everything from him. Samuel finally spoke. It doesn't matter anymore. Daniel looked at him in disbelief. It matters to me. Samuel smiled gently. You have bigger responsibilities now. Daniel shook his head. Not bigger than the truth. Richard removed one final envelope from the folder. It had never been opened. Its edges had faded with age. Across the front, written in elegant handwriting, were 6 simple words. To be opened if I'm ever found. Richard carefully handed it to Samuel. I've protected this for 30 years. Samuel stared at the envelope. His hands began to tremble. He recognized the handwriting instantly. A handwriting he believed he would never see again. His eyes filled with tears. He whispered only one name. Elizabeth. Daniel looked at him. Who's Elizabeth? Samuel couldn't answer. Because if the handwriting was real, then the woman he had mourned for 3 decades may never have been gone at all. There are letters that arrive too late. Letters that carry regret. And then there are letters that rewrite an entire lifetime. Samuel Carter held the faded envelope as though it might disappear if he loosened his grip. 30 years. 30 long years. Since he had seen Elizabeth's handwriting. The woman he believed he had buried in his heart forever. His hands trembled. Not from age, but from hope. Hope can be the most terrifying feeling of all. The street outside First National Bank had grown unusually quiet. Employees stood frozen near the entrance. Customers slowed their pace. Even passing traffic seemed distant. No one wanted to interrupt what was unfolding. Daniel looked at Samuel. You don't have to open it if you're not ready. Samuel smiled sadly. I've spent 30 years wondering. I think I've waited long enough. Slowly, he broke the seal. Inside, there was only one letter, folded carefully. Its paper had yellowed with age. Samuel unfolded it. His eyes scanned the first few lines. Then, he stopped breathing. Tears filled his eyes instantly. Daniel stepped closer. What does it say? Samuel couldn't answer. His voice had abandoned him. Richard gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Would you like me to read it? Samuel nodded. Silently, Richard unfolded the letter. His voice echoed softly across the sidewalk. My dearest Samuel, if this letter has finally reached you, then someone has chosen truth over silence. Samuel closed his eyes. He already recognized every curve of Elizabeth's handwriting. It was unmistakably hers. Richard continued. You spent years believing I left you. Please believe me. I never did. Gasps escaped from those standing nearby. Daniel looked at Samuel. His face had turned pale. The letter continued. The night before everything changed, I discovered something. Someone inside the bank was secretly stealing millions from customers. Daniel's heart skipped. Richard looked down at the old documents. He knew exactly where the letter was leading. When I tried to report it, they threatened us. They said if I spoke, they would destroy your career and our family. Samuel slowly lowered his head. He had never known. Not once. Not in 30 years. Richard continued reading. I thought leaving was the only way to protect you. I believed they would stop once I disappeared. I was wrong. Daniel looked toward the towering bank. The building suddenly felt different, as though its polished walls had been hiding secrets for decades. Samuel whispered quietly. Elizabeth. His voice broke. You should have told me. Richard turned another page. If you're reading this, then I'm probably no longer here. But I need you to know one thing before I leave this world. I never stopped loving you. Samuel covered his face. The years of loneliness, the unanswered questions, the sleepless nights, suddenly made heartbreaking sense. Then came the sentence. No one expected. The people responsible were never punished. One of them still works inside the bank. The crowd fell silent. Daniel slowly looked back toward the headquarters. Someone, inside his own bank, had built a career on a lie. Richard quietly removed another document from the folder. This came with the letter. It was a faded photograph. For executives stood smiling during the bank's grand reopening. 3 faces had been crossed out in blue ink. Only one remained untouched. Daniel looked closely. His stomach tightened. He recognized the man immediately. One of the bank's current board members. A man Daniel had met. Only yesterday. Richard spoke carefully. He changed his name years ago. But it's the same man. Samuel stared at the photograph. He whispered one heartbreaking sentence. I trusted him like a brother. At that exact moment, the revolving doors of First National Bank slowly opened. The elderly board member stepped outside. He smiled politely, until his eyes met Samuel's. The smile disappeared instantly. The color drained from his face. Because after 30 years, the one man he prayed he'd never see again was standing directly across the street. Some lies survive because everyone who knows the truth is too afraid to speak. Others survive because the only people who can expose them disappear. For 30 years, one lie had quietly lived inside the walls of First National Bank. It had destroyed a family, stolen a man's future, and built another man's fortune. Now, that lie was about to collapse. The elderly board member froze. His briefcase slipped from his hand. Papers scattered across the sidewalk. For several long seconds, neither man moved. Samuel looked exactly as he had every morning for 15 years. Worn brown coat, gray beard, old canvas backpack. But today, the board member wasn't looking at a homeless man. He was looking at a ghost. He whispered, No, it can't be. Samuel smiled sadly. It is. Daniel watched the man's face carefully. He had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals. He knew what guilt looked like, and the man standing before him looked terrified. Daniel stepped forward. Do you know Mr. Carter? The board member forced a weak smile. I've never met him. Samuel quietly laughed. Not with anger. With disappointment. 35 years. And you're still lying. Maria watched from across the street. Even the pedestrians had stopped walking. Something far bigger than an ordinary conversation was unfolding. Richard reached into his briefcase. He removed another folder. This should help refresh your memory. The board member's face turned pale. Court records, internal audit reports, signed financial statements. One signature appeared over and over again. His. Daniel looked at the documents. His expression changed instantly. This, he whispered. This was all covered up. Richard nodded. Every page. The investigation disappeared. The witnesses disappeared. And Samuel became the perfect man to blame. The board member suddenly raised his voice. You don't understand. I was following orders. Samuel looked at him calmly. Whose orders? Silence. The man looked toward the towering headquarters, then slowly lowered his head. There was someone above all of us. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Richard answered quietly. The former chairman. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. The former chairman. A banking legend. A man whose portrait still hung inside the executive boardroom. The man employees called the founder of modern First National. Richard slowly shook his head. He wasn't a hero. He built his empire by sacrificing Samuel. Samuel looked toward the bank. I trusted him. I believed we were protecting families together. He was protecting himself. Daniel could barely believe what he was hearing. So everything. The investigation. The missing money. The loss of your bank. Samuel nodded. It was all planned. Just then, a young woman hurried out of the bank. She carried an old archive box in her arms. Mr. Whitmore, she called. I found something. Daniel looked surprised. What is it? I was cleaning the executive archives. This box was hidden behind a false wall. Richard's eyes widened. A false wall? The young woman nodded. It was sealed. It looked like someone never wanted it found. Daniel opened the dusty box. Inside, hundreds of handwritten documents. Old accounting ledgers, meeting minutes, personal journals. Then, at the very bottom, a leather-bound notebook. Across the cover, gold letters had faded with time. It read, Samuel Carter. Samuel stared at it in disbelief. My journal. I thought it was destroyed. He slowly opened the first page. Everything was there. Every meeting. Every financial decision. Every warning he had written about the missing money. Every conversation. Every name. Every signature. The evidence. 30 years. Hidden inside the bank. Only a few floors above the offices of the people who had betrayed him. Richard smiled softly. This proves everything. Daniel looked at Samuel. His voice trembled. You've been innocent all along. Samuel quietly nodded. I always knew. I just couldn't prove it. Then Daniel turned the final page. Folded inside was one last handwritten note. Not from Samuel. Not from Elizabeth. But from the former chairman himself. Across the top, written in bold ink, were 7 chilling words. If this journal is ever found. Daniel slowly unfolded the note. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face. Because the chairman hadn't written a denial. He had written, a confession. The truth has a strange way of surviving. You can bury documents, destroy records, silence witnesses, even steal someone's reputation. But the truth waits patiently until someone finally has the courage to uncover it. After 30 years, that moment had arrived. Daniel Whitmore held the faded confession in trembling hands. The sidewalk outside First National Bank had become completely silent. Employees filled the front steps. Customers stood frozen. Even passing strangers sensed something extraordinary was unfolding. Slowly, Daniel unfolded the final page. The handwriting was unmistakable. It belonged to the bank's former chairman, the man whose portrait still hung proudly inside the executive boardroom. Daniel began reading. If this journal is ever found, then I have failed to keep my greatest secret. A murmur spread through the crowd. Daniel continued. Samuel Carter never stole a single dollar. Samuel quietly closed his eyes. Not because he was surprised. Because after 30 years, someone had finally spoken the truth. Daniel's voice became heavier. The missing money was taken under my orders. I blamed Samuel because he refused to participate. Gasps echoed across the sidewalk. Maria covered her mouth. Several longtime employees looked at each other in disbelief. The homeless man had spent 3 decades carrying someone else's crime. Daniel continued reading. Samuel believed a bank exists to protect ordinary people. I believed a bank exists to create power. History will decide which one of us was right. Samuel lowered his head. He whispered softly. I already know. The confession continued. I offered Samuel everything. Money, position, silence. He refused all of it. I have never met a more honest man. Daniel looked towards Samuel. Tears filled his eyes. The man sitting on a stone bench every morning had once risked everything, simply because he refused to betray ordinary families. Then came the final paragraph. If anyone is reading this, restores Samuel Carter's name. Not because he deserves pity, because he deserves justice. Daniel lowered the confession. No one spoke. Justice. It had taken 30 years. The elderly board member slowly stepped forward. His shoulders shook. For the first time, the powerful executive who had hidden behind wealth and titles looked like a broken old man. He stopped in front of Samuel. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he removed his expensive suit jacket, folded it carefully, and knelt on the cold sidewalk. I'm sorry. His voice cracked. I should have told the truth years ago. Samuel looked down at him. There was no anger in his eyes, only sadness. Daniel expected Samuel to condemn him, to demand revenge, to celebrate his innocence. Instead, Samuel quietly reached down, held out his hand, and helped the man back to his feet. Richard stared in disbelief. So, you're forgiving him? Samuel smiled gently. No, I'm freeing myself. Everyone fell silent. Samuel looked toward the bank. I've carried this weight for 30 years. I'm too old to carry it another day. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He realized the richest man standing on that sidewalk wasn't the CEO. It wasn't the board member. It wasn't the chairman who had once ruled the bank. It was the homeless man who had learned how to forgive. Then Samuel reached into his old canvas backpack one final time. He removed a small leather folder. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. Its edges were worn from years of being carried. He handed it to Daniel. I've been waiting 15 years to give this to the right person. Daniel looked confused. What is it? Samuel smiled. My final request. Daniel unfolded the paper. His expression changed instantly. It wasn't a request for money, or an apology, or recognition. It was a handwritten plan for transforming First National Bank into the most compassionate bank in the country. At the very bottom, Samuel had written one final sentence. A bank should never measure its success by the money it keeps, but by the lives it helps build. Daniel looked up. Tears streamed down his face. Because he already knew, his first decision as CEO would change the future of the bank forever. Some people spend their entire lives chasing success. Others spend their lives protecting it. But very few spend their lives giving it away. Samuel Carter never wanted his name restored. He never wanted headlines. He never wanted revenge. All he ever wanted was for the bank he built to become the place he had always dreamed it could be. The morning sun slowly climbed above the skyline. For the first time in years, the sidewalk outside First National Bank looked different. Not because the building had changed, because the people had. Employees who had once hurried past Samuel now stood quietly around him. Some wiped away tears. Others couldn't bring themselves to meet his eyes. They remembered every morning they had walked by without saying hello. Every afternoon, they had assumed his story wasn't worth knowing. Now, they understood how wrong they had been. Daniel folded Samuel's handwritten proposal, then looked directly at the board members. His voice was calm, but carried a quiet authority. Effective immediately, the Samuel Carter Foundation will be established. The crowd looked at him, confused. Daniel continued. This bank exists today because one man refused to sacrifice his integrity. It's time we honored that integrity. He turned another page. Beginning this year, no veteran will pay banking fees. Students from low-income families will receive education grants. Small business owners who lose everything to disasters will receive emergency interest-free loans. Elderly customers living alone will receive free financial assistance. And every employee, he paused, will spend one paid day every month volunteering in the community. The employees exchanged emotional glances. This wasn't just a new policy. It was a new beginning. Daniel walked over to Samuel, holding a small velvet box. I believe this belongs to you. Samuel looked confused. Daniel opened it. Inside rested the original brass key to the executive office, the very office Samuel had occupied decades earlier. I found it in the archives. You never should have lost it. Samuel smiled softly, then gently closed the box. No, I don't need it anymore. Daniel frowned. Why? Samuel looked toward the busy street. Because leadership isn't about sitting in an office. It's about serving people. You already understand that. Daniel embraced Samuel, not as a CEO, not as a businessman, but as the frightened little boy who had once stood beneath a blue umbrella. "You saved my life twice." Samuel smiled. "I only remember once." Daniel laughed through tears. "The second time was today." Weeks passed. News spread across the country. Not about a financial scandal, not about a billionaire, but about a homeless man who had once owned a bank, lost everything protecting ordinary families, and still chose forgiveness over revenge. Television crews arrived. Newspapers asked for interviews. Publishers offered book deals. Samuel politely declined every one. "I've already told my story," he said. "Now it's someone else's turn." 1 month later, the stone bench outside the bank was still there. But something had changed. A small bronze plaque had been placed beside it. It read, "Samuel Carter's Bench. Never judge a person's present before learning their past." Every morning, fresh flowers appeared beside it. No one knew who left them. Perhaps they didn't need to. Maria's coffee shop became busier than ever. But one tradition never changed. Every weekday, at exactly 7:45, she carried one fresh cup of coffee across the street. She placed it on the bench, just as she had for years. One cold autumn morning, a young woman asked her, "Is someone coming?" Maria smiled. He already did. Samuel no longer sat there every day. Instead, he spent his mornings visiting schools, hospitals, veterans centers, youth shelters. Everywhere he went, he carried the same old blue umbrella. Children often asked why. He would smile and answer, "Because one rainy day, it helped me find my purpose." Several months later, Daniel invited Samuel back to the bank. Not for a meeting, for a celebration. Hundreds of employees filled the lobby. Customers stood beside them. The mayor arrived. Teachers, firefighters, veterans, families whose savings Samuel had protected decades earlier. Many had never known his name. Until now. Daniel stepped onto the stage. "There is one final thing we need to do." He reached toward the wall behind him. The large portrait of the former chairman was carefully removed. In its place, a new portrait was unveiled. Not of Samuel in an expensive suit, not as a wealthy banker, but exactly as people had come to know him, wearing his worn brown coat, holding his old blue umbrella, smiling gently. The audience rose to its feet. A standing ovation echoed throughout the building. Samuel looked embarrassed. "I don't deserve this." Daniel smiled. "You're wrong. You taught us that character is worth more than reputation." As the applause faded, Samuel quietly walked back outside. He sat on the familiar stone bench one last time. The city moved around him. Cars passed. People hurried to work, just as they always had. But something was different. This time, people stopped. A young businessman shook his hand. A little girl waved. An elderly couple thanked him, not because he had once owned the bank, but because he had reminded them what true wealth looks like. As the sun rose higher, Samuel stood, picked up his old backpack, opened his blue umbrella. Even though the sky was perfectly clear, Daniel watched from the bank entrance. "Why the umbrella?" Samuel smiled. "You never know who might need shelter." He tipped his hat, turned the corner, and quietly disappeared into the crowd. Not as the homeless man everyone once ignored, but as the man who proved that a person's greatest fortune isn't measured by the money they earn. It's measured by the lives they choose to lift. 6 months later, the Samuel Carter Foundation had helped thousands of families. Students graduated because someone believed in them. Small businesses reopened. Veterans found hope. Children learned about honesty before they learned about success. And every new employee at First National Bank heard the same story on their first day. Not about profits, not about investments, but about a quiet man who sat outside the bank every morning, waiting, not for money, not for recognition, but for the chance to see one frightened little boy become the leader he always believed he could be. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson Samuel Carter left behind. The world may judge you by where you stand today, but your true legacy will always be measured by the hope you leave in the hearts of others.